The topic of the shiur is treasures from Rav SaAadia on Megillat Ekha. And that's because it's based on a sefer, a book that recently came out, that only came out, was published 2 years ago, around the time of Tish'a BeAb. And it's an amazing story behind how this book came together and was published. I'll get to that in a minute. And the book is written by Rav SaAadia Gaon. So first, a word about Rav SaAadia Gaon. I have to say that Rav SaAadia Gaon is tremendously underrated. We all know, everybody here has heard of the Rambam, and we know the effect of the Rambam on his time, on the generations that follows. We know about his Farim. Unfortunately, although Rav SaAadia Gaon was just as prolific, if not more than the Rambam, as an author, and the effect that he had in his time was tremendous, he's not known as well as the Rambam. I can easily say that Rav SaAadia paved the way for Morenu HaRambam, and I can even go as far to say is that if there was not Rav SaAadia Gaon, there wouldn't be the Rambam. Rav SaAadia Gaon lived in the 9th century, was born in Egypt, known as Rav SaAadia Gaon ben Yosef il Fayumi, which means he was from Fayum, Egypt, Old Cairo. And he lived in a period which was called the Gaonic period, which is after the Gemara, from 500 to the year 1000. And in Bavel, there were 2 yeshivot, and the Rosh Yeshiva of each yeshiva was known as a Gaon. What was unusual was that usually they would have those who were in Bavel, the Hachamim of Bavel, who stood at the head of the yeshiva as the Gaon. But Rav SaAadia, who was born in Egypt, was not from Bavel. He was called to become the head of one of the yeshivot in Bavel, Gaon of Suda. He, in his lifetime, had many confrontations with the Karaim. Mainly, he fought the Karaim strongly, especially in Egypt. There was a strong contingency of Karaim. He fought them verbally and in writing and in some of his sefarim. And he fought his entire life to keep authentic Judaism strong and preserve it and make sure it's passed on to the next generation. He's known as Rosh Hamdaberim Bechol Makom. He's known as the one who's the head of those who are talking in every place. What does that mean? It means that when we look at Sfarim, since the time of the Gemara, after the year 500, the Gemara was sealed. We don't have many other Sfarim after the Gemara. We have maybe She'iltot that have a high Gaon. We have some collections of Tshuvot, of responsive Gaonim. But what Rav SaAadia Gaon did, we have Midrashim, but what Rav SaAadia Gaon did is right in every area of Judaism. And he wrote systematically. He wrote the first book on philosophy called Emunot V'De'ot. He wrote books on halacha. He has Sefer HaMitzvot, he has Azarot, commentary in the Mishnah, he has responsa, and also halachot on topics, as many of the Gaonim wrote. He wrote Shira. He has books on Lashon HaKodesh, on Dikduk. He has books, as I mentioned, against Sifrei Polmos, against the Karaim and others. And he has, on the Torah, he translated the entire Tanakh into Arabic, That's called the Tafsir. In addition to that, he wrote a Perush on many books of the Tanakh. We know he wrote on Bereshit, Shemot, and Vayikra, and we have some of that was produced. And we have some of his other Perushim on other books of Tanakh, like Daniel, Rav Kapach put out on Eyob, on Mishleh, on Tehillim. But what we did not have until recently was his commentary on Megillat Ekha. We had his translation of Megillat Ekha. But a commentary on Megillat Ekha we did not have. And this commentary was put out about 2 years ago. And how it came about is quite amazing. So I'm going to show you the book cover, which details the story. I'm sharing the screen. I hope you all could see it. If it needs to be bigger, let me know. Is that good? Could we see it? Yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I can make it a little bigger if need be. Okay, so which means the birth, how this book came about.
It's hard to hear. I mean, it needs to be louder. Or could you raise up your volume?
Oh, okay. We could try that. Okay. The book was put together when this Rav Shammaya, Rabbi from Yerushalayim, was putting together a book of Rav Tanhum Hayrushalmi, another rabbi from Egypt, from the Beit Midrash of Harambam. He has a commentary on Ekha. When they were working on that book, they found many fragments in the Cairo Geniza. We don't have time to talk about the Cairo Geniza, a famous Geniza. There were thousands of Sfarim, of fragments in the Cairo Geniza. And when they were working on this book, Rav Tanhum Hayrushalmi, they found tens of Geniza fragments written in Arabic, which were Perushim on Megillat Ekha. And there is an amazing program that puts together, that could recognize different Geniza fragments, and it can put them together. And when they put these fragments together, they understood what they found. They found the Perusha Aroch, the lengthy commentary of Rav SaAadia Gaon on Megillat Ekha, a book that's quoted. It's quoted by Rishonim, but it never came out to light. It never was published in a full form. And here they realized what they stumbled upon, and they put it all together. And amazingly, they put out the Sefer on Megillat Ekha. And so therefore, the book itself, to begin with, is a treasure. And his Perushim of Rav SaAadia Gaon are beautiful, beautiful Perushim. They themselves are treasures. What I'd like to do is go through some of the introduction. He has a very lengthy introduction and give you a sample of one or two Pesukim that he's mefaresh, and you'll understand why he begins with that introduction and how it connects to his Perush on Ekha. The introduction is very systematic, very lengthy introduction. I'm going to go through parts of it. We'll try to understand the methodology here of Rav SaAadia Gaon and why he's writing this as his introduction. Just before we start, he names each book of his, which is a perush, which is a lengthy perush, he gives a name to it. So for example, his lengthy perush to Tehillim, he calls Sefer El Tasabih, which is Sefer Tushbehot, the book of praises. The book of Ekha, very unusual name. If I asked you to come up with a name for Megillat Ekha, a name that describes, Megillat Ekha, or the purpose of Megillat Ekha, what would you call it? How would you describe it? You could unmute yourselves, you could type it in, whatever you like. If you're speaking, you have to unmute yourself. If you want to type on the chat, give me one example. What would you call a title to describe Megillat Ekha?
ספר הדמעות.
Okay, Sefer of crying. Rabbi, do you want to say something?
Not sure. Still thinking.
What?
Still thinking.
Okay, still thinking. Tov. Dema'ot, maybe Sefer Kinot, right? Eulogies. Rav SaAadia calls it Sefer Hamidot, book of character traits. I'll show you. I'll put up the next page from the book. Get that back here. 1 second. Share the screen. Okay. Share screen. So if you look, it's about Sefer Hamidot above SaAadia Gaon. That's what he called it. The book of Midot. Sefer Hamidot, Hamikabetz, To'alot Shonot, Miklal Hamidot. That gathers To'alot Shonot, Miklal Hamidot, different, let's say, Ma'alot from the Midot. You'll understand in a moment why he called it this interesting name, Sefer Hamidot. The first thing that he says is Adam, man, is Olam Katan. Man is a small world. This is a concept that is quoted or just stated often in many Mefarshim, that man is a microcosm of the world. And the root of it is here in SaAadia. ולעצם העניין, כאשר תשבו בשכל ההשגות של החושים ונקבעו בטבע, יתעמד למדעים, שגוף בני האדם המדונים, the body of people, of men, people that talk, על אף שהוא קטן, even though it's small, נהיים חלקיו ופעולותיו לעצומים שבגופים. It's similar to great bodies. What does he mean? He means earth. And what surrounds earth. Therefore, man is considered man is considered to be in Olam. And he goes on to prove the concept from Pasuk in Zechariah. Mesad Yevar Hashem HaYisrael Ne'um Hashem Noter Shamayim V'yosed Haaretz V'yosed Ruach Adam B'kirbo. The Pasuk is making a comparison. These are the words of Hashem, who Noter Shamayim V'yosed Haaretz created heaven and earth, and V'yosed Ruach Adam, and created the Ruach of man. You see, the creation of man, of Ruach Adam, right, which is the man that has the power to speak. That's why he keeps saying Guf HaMedaber. The creation of man is equated with heaven and earth, Shamayim Va'aretz. And the idea he explains in another place, in Emunot V'De'ot, because everything was created for man. Shamayim Va'aretz was created ultimately for man, and therefore the Pasuk is making that comparison. That's what he begins with. And he then goes on to talk about the midot. As we mentioned, he called the Sefer Midot, and he goes on to mention the main midot. He goes through 20 different midot, 20 different character traits, and the purpose of each one. We don't have time for it. It goes into the ka'ava and anava, arrogance and humility, and speaks about the benefits and the detriments of each one. It goes through all of these different character traits. And as you're reading it, you're wondering, what in the world does this have to do with Megillat Ekha? Until he leaves the last two. The last two relate to Megillat Ekha. The last two are Tish'a and Gaon, the midot of happiness and the midah of sadness, of Gaon, agony, despair. You wonder, why did SaAadia, why did he begin with the idea that man is a microcosm, that man is olam katan? Why did he begin with that before he started to talk about the midot? They suggest something, but I think it's a very simple reason why. I wish we had time to hear from you, but we don't. We have to understand that when we're talking about midot, we're talking about the inner thoughts, the inner traits of a man. People might not view it as so important, might not value the midot that much, especially if it's just inside that person. But of course, we know the great importance of midot and how it affects the person and those around him and how it affects the entire world. And I think that's why SaAadia Gaon began with the premise that man, Adam, is olam katan. You're a small world. So these midot are tremendously important. Okay, now. He speaks about Simcha and Gaon, why Hashem created Simcha, having happiness leads people to thank him, to thank God for all of the good that they have. So that's one of the benefits of Simcha. He goes on through different types of Simcha and different benefits. But we need to get to Gaon, right? That's the focus if we're talking about Megillat Ekha. Gaon is something which comes as a result of one of two things. Either shelilat tova, either the loss of good, or haga'at sa'ar, or something bad happening to a person. Now, what's the reason? Why does Hashem take good away from it? What is the benefit? What comes out of shelilat hatovah? So SaAadia explains it could be a punishment. Al-avonot shepasuvo, punishment for sins that he had. And the Gaon, when that happens, the Gaon, the sorrow, the despair that he's feeling when he loses that good, will keep him away from doing it again, because he lost something. Let's say Bar Minan, he was wealthy, he lost his wealth. Now he reflects on his actions, he understands he was doing things wrong, maybe he wasn't honest in business, and now he'll be careful not to continue with his averot, because he doesn't want to lose other things, lo aleinu, health, family, all the other great things that he has. He'll be careful. So that could be one reason for shelilat tova. The other reason could be it's a test from Hashem. Hashem is testing him. He took something away that he gave him to begin with, and he's testing him, and if he passes the test, of course, his sachar is greater. The same with Yisurim, Ken Hadavar Yisurim. If people that are experiencing Yisurim certainly learn the lessons from it. And even those that don't experience the Yisurim, when they see what happens to others, that scares them, that teaches them to, act properly, not to commit averot. There's a Kadosh Baruch Hu. This is the result of Yagon. Okay, now, what he then transitions to is that when a person has Yagon, it leads to Bechi, it leads to crying. And he explains interesting, like how how crying works. How does the tear come out exactly from your body? But in any case, he talks about crying. And then he talks about things that a person might do when the sorrow is strong. If things happen one after another, if the tragedies happen, one after another, crying wouldn't be enough. There's things that are accompany crying. And he goes through 20 things. We don't have time for it. 20 things that a person might do, and he shows parallels in Tanakh. A person might, hit his hand against his thigh, hit his hand on his head, hit his hand on his heart, rip clothing, all different expressions of grief, of sorrow, which accompany the Bechi, and those are found later in the Megillah itself. And the last one is Kina. Second to last one is Yevava, is when a person is crying, so caught up in crying that you can't really understand what they're saying. They're so, caught up in their crying. It happens sometimes. It happens sometimes on Tish'a BeAb, as you're reading Kinot or Ekha, person's reading is so caught up with his emotions, he can barely understand the words that are coming out of his mouth. That's Yevava. And the last one is Kina. And that's how it comes full circle to Kina, which is the topic of Megillat Ekha. Kina is bedibur. Kina is when a person is crying, but he's not just crying, he's expressing his grief, and he's expressing it in a very clear manner. And there's many benefits to that. And Rav SaAadia Gaon gives us the reasons why Megillat Ekha was written to begin with, and the purpose of Megillat Ekha. So I'm going to share that with you. There we go. Okay. 5 reasons why Ekha was written. Number 1 was for the immediate aftermath of the first destruction during the 70 years of exile. This was a book that they could reflect upon, and they would learn from it. That's the first one. Second one, there's details of the story that aren't found. Details of the Hurban that we don't find in Sefer Melachim Yirmiyahu, like the fact that Ammon and Moab entered the Beit HaMikdash. The third is most relevant for us. Habanim HaGedelim Begalut, those children who grow up in exile. Even though we know we're in Galut because of the sin of our ancestors, and the fact that we continue doing the sins of our ancestors, when we learn it, when you come and you read Megillat Ekha, that will prevent you from copying those ways. And that's a very vital message for us. We read of Megillat Ekha, and what happened to the Bet HaMikdash and to those living in those times. And when you couple that with what we just read on Shabbat Hazon, how they treated the Bet HaMikdash, how they just came and gave their ritual sacrifices, they did their thing in the Bet HaMikdash, and didn't change their life whatsoever. They were acting like Sdom v'Amorah. We take the same lesson. And we apply it to our Batei Knesiyot, which we just this year we had to close. And our Batei Midrashot that had to close for 2-3 months. We had no Batei Knesiyot, Batei Midrashot. Why? The same reason that the Bet HaMikdash was lost. The way we treat our Batei Knesiyot. This is the lessons that's coming out of Megillat Ekha, and this is what we're supposed to wake up to, especially as we're inching back into our Batei Knesiyot. That's why Megillat Ekha was written. Number 4, to fear Hashem, Kedesh Yir'u Mimenu. If that's what happened to them, what's going to be with us? And the 5th, because everything that is written in the Megillah, this is a beautiful concept of SaAadia Gaon brings up, and I guess we'll have to end with this. I see BeAb is geared and ready. He says everything in Ekha is going to turn positive if we do our part. Kemoshe Amar, I'm going to turn their mourning into rejoicing. I'll console them. I'll make them happy from their despair. That was the midah he was focusing on. Yagon. V'dugmato like Hashem did with BeAb. Everything BeAb wanted to curse, Hashem turned it into a beracha. Even though we have in other books of Tanakh, Nechamot and Besorot, Rechabot Varukot, with beautiful nevuot in Yeshayahu about the Nechama. And I'm just going to show you what this is what he does. The last page of the book, he actually shows, he goes through a few of the Pesukim in Ekha, and shows what the opposite is going to be, what the beracha is going to be. Ekha Yesheva, Badad. How were we Badad? Right? This was with Badad alone. We know the biggest curse is being alone. He connects it to Adam Rishon. The first thing Hashem created for him was a mate. Right? When he was Badad, he was cursed. Hashem made him a mate. He was blessed. Ekha Yesheva Badad. You're all alone, Yerushalayim. The opposite, Perazot Tish'a b'Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim will be Perazot, will be surrounded by, all around you'll have settlements, all around Yerushalayim. We're nearing this, right? So we're getting closer to the fulfillment of all Menachamot. The opposite of Hayta Kalman lo Alman Yisrael. The opposite of Hayta Lamas, we won't be subservient to anyone. Ke'govem Malcha Eshali Abducha. The opposite to Bachot Tivke, Bacholot Tivke. And so on and so forth. He goes through each of the horrible descriptions of the Hurban, and he shows how Hashem is going to turn it into a Yeshua and Nechama, Yerason Shnizkei L'Roto, B'Mirabi Amenu Amen.